reported Friday. That's down 24% this week. But hospitalizations remain at peak levels.
Taking a test that I didn't study for.
Yate, this is Klee with another quarantine report update. This is number 3. Sorry, it took a little bit of time between the last update. I know folks have been wondering what's going on, and I really appreciate the support, the love, and responses so far. I wanted to just update real quick regarding our situation here and experience, and then get into the real part of my updates, which I guess for the most part are just a bit of a rant. This one will be specifically about resource colonialism. I touched on a lot of that at the presentation I did yesterday for Red Hoop Talk, hosted by the Association on American Indian Affairs. So check that out if you haven't. I'll go a little bit more in depth about some of the stuff, but I'm going to try to keep this short if it's possible. So at this point, I am at about day 12 of the exposure time frame for COVID-19. I tested at 2 days when I first started noticing symptoms, mainly because I just had what felt like a basic cold, and actually the worst that my symptoms got, because I feel relatively fine, except for you can hear my throat's a little rough. The worst of my symptoms have been sore throat. And then one night I had a lot of congestion, and then just mucus drainage, and very little coughing, no fever, all that. So my symptoms have been extremely mild, to the point where I've had colds that were worse. So not to provide any false sense of experience, but just to report what my exposure was. My partner, who is vaccinated and boosted, fully vaccinated twice, I believe, and then boosted, had worse symptoms than myself. And actually, their symptoms are persisting just yesterday, and they're on day 10 of their symptoms. They tested positive again. And so we're looking forward to testing out, following the sort of extended guidelines from the CDC, because they say test out if you're vaccinated at day 5. But in this case, she's still positive, and so we're resetting our isolation time frame and looking at testing out again in about 4 to 5 days as well. And so that was the at-home antigen test, and we just got our government handout tests in today, so I might be testing out around the same time again, just to check. But again, that's our experience so far. And so my partner's had more of a cough, no fever, a lot of mucus congestion, drainage, and so forth, and no body aches, anything more severe that has been reported for other folks based on their experience as well. So we're doing relatively fine. We've been just isolating, observing very stringent COVID protocols. We have not left, and we have no contact deliveries coming in from family members and so forth, mutual aid support, which has been really awesome. I think it's important to note again that, I'm unvaccinated, I'm immunocompromised and taking immunosuppressant drugs. I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, actually 2 of them, over the course of this past year, which was a real surprise. I've been primarily relying on traditional medicines in consultation with my father, my sister, both practitioners who have been trying to find an interesting balance between the allopathic or Western medicines, which I don't, live my life by. And so that's been something that through this process actually has been really an important guidance. I know there's a lot of other traditional folks out there who also have just relied solely on traditional medicines, and that's carried them through. So I want to shout out to that important source for our ways of being, but also recognize that it's important if folks are, comfortable getting vaccinated. And it's, just from my perspective, I just want to make this short. I'm not an anti-vaxxer. Fuck the fascists, as I mentioned before, who are just drumming up like conspiracy theory bullshit to really justify their like, independent American sort of exceptional independence and freedoms, whatever that means in terms of not giving a shit about other people who might be vulnerable, and really pushing against common sense protocols. Fuck authoritarianism and government mandates on that level. Maybe we could agree, but when it comes down to not giving a shit about other people and flaunting or challenging mask use, just this common sense protocol to make sure other people are well and healthy, and being so terrifyingly paranoid and skeptical about the medical industries or pharmaceutical industries push for the vaccine. I mean, I'm not vaccinated mainly because of my traditional medicines and beliefs, but also because the medical industry has attacked Indigenous people and undermined the pharmaceutical companies and the medical industry as a whole. And the colonial system has sought to attack our medicines, destroy them, destroy our medicine keepers and practitioners. So, we have a different legacy. I mean, forced sterilizations up until just decades ago, in the medical world. I mean, it's important to recognize the context of not only eugenics, but warfare that was waged through the medical system, and why a lot of folks, for at least Indigenous folks, are not too keen and skeptical. And especially if you look at the substandard healthcare that has been the marker of IHS, or Indian Health Service clinics. I mean, my dad used to work at IHS for 18 years at Winslow Indian Health Service Clinic, and they constantly tried to tie his hands and undermine him at many turns. Even though he had some support there at the end of it, he just got so frustrated because they were trying to control what he was doing and his ability to heal people, that he was pushed out because he could be more effective outside of the hospital treating patients. And so this is part of that information. I mean, I never had a flu vaccine, never consented, or at least as far as being older, I don't know, I'm sure my mom and dad made choices or were forced to make choices when I was younger, but that hasn't been my pathway. The only vaccine I think I actually had to get was a yellow fever shot to travel to Africa for tour in Mali, which was a compromise I was forced to make. But just consider that. I'm not opposed to people getting vaccinated, and it's good to see that so many folks on different levels that's working for them and preventing them from severe symptoms and the mortality that so many have faced. So I don't want to take that away or undermine that, because I have lost a lot of family members and my partner as well. So it's important if folks make that choice, and I encourage them to, if that works for them and they can reconcile that with their ways. This has been part of that experience, thinking about that and processing that, and understanding the herbs and everything that we're using through this process, which has been very helpful in the guidance and the balance of trying to figure out what medicines can work and not, because it's not that they're mutually exclusive in terms of what we can use. We just check it with the medicine practitioners and see, is this something that can work for us, or is it working against us? What's the sources, on that spiritual basis? And so, just like many things, a tool that we can use. And so I wanted to get into a bit about the resource colonialism, and I think that I'll just sort of walk through a bit of the map that I'm making. If for those of you who saw the presentation yesterday, there's like sort of in-depth part, and I'll provide a link down below, or maybe link up here for the show, so you can check it out and see a little bit more of the context. You can also check out my essay that I wrote, which I keep promoting here because it really contextualizes the experience. I mean, since I was determined to be COVID positive in my results, and Indigenous people being already a high-risk category just by existing, we have to look at the environmental factors, and that's the central focus of my essay, because this is being largely ignored by our tribal politicians in their response to address the COVID pandemic. They're still trying to push forward helium fracking in industries on sacred lands in our communities. And that compounds with the uranium mining. It compounds with the coal mining. It compounds with the coal-fired power plants and the pollution of our bodies. It compounds with the food desert issue and diabetes. It compounds with the legacy of abandoned uranium mines and the spills like the Church Rock spill, 1979. One of the single largest accident in U.S. history happened in Denebekea on Navajo lands, and not many people know about it. But that poisoning of the land and the autoimmune diseases that can result from exposure to radioactive pollution, not just the cancers that come along with that. 523 abandoned uranium mines left polluting our lands, not one of them meaningfully cleaned up to a standard that restores and protects our health. And the EPA has closed 22 wells due to high levels of radioactivity. And what do we see? That impacts 50,000 people who relied on those wells. And, again, since the time I was diagnosed to now, there's 1,000 more cases on the res. That brings it up to 50,000 people. So we can't not see the coincidences of these environmental factors that have been compounded because our lands have been just viewed as a resource colony. And this is what we mean when we talk about resource colonialism and the need to intervene to ensure that our health and well-being is protected. The sacred sites need to be protected so we can restore, we can heal ourselves. The land, what we do to the land, we do to our bodies. It's not an exaggeration. That is how we live our lives. There's no dichotomy between spirit and nature for Diné people and any indigenous people, really. Wherever there's an environmental crisis, there's a social or cultural crisis, because we are people of the earth. And as I mentioned in the presentation, global warming is one of the greatest threats facing humanity right now. It's a consequence of the war that has been waged against Mother Earth, and we need to intervene. And this is what we talk about when we talk about anti-colonial struggle. So for those of you who want to be accomplices, not just allies, disrupt your social order. Don't just find ways to make your lives green and sustainable or preserve this unsustainable way of being, because the dynamic in dimensions, when you look at this map, we look at that I'm working on, is still not finished, and it's based on a list and a poster that I helped produce with Indigenous Action years ago. But if we look at the context of resource colonialism and the impacts, and we look at this idea of creating green economies, it's like trying to unplug from a non-renewable source of energy and power into a green one. It doesn't change the power relationship that is based on exploitation, domination, and that is resource colonialism, but it's just greenwashed. And so if you want to go off and adjust your lifestyle choices so they're more green, you're just sustaining colonial occupation. Let's seek and find ways to intervene in the infrastructure that is destroying Mother Earth and precipitate a crisis that brings about its end. This is what is meant by anti-colonial struggle, is the undoing, the settling of these lands. We can talk about land back, we can talk about decolonization, but they're just words unless they're put into action. And so this is a critically important issue to understand in terms of COVID-19 in this crisis. I'm not interested in returning to any sense of normalcy, because normalcy for us means that it's the dead end of our cultural survival. It means the death of our existence, still, whichever way that we figure that. And so to intervene, to struggle for Indigenous liberation is to ensure that our lands, our well-beings, we heal these traumas, and we recognize that we all have a role to play in that struggle. And so I just want to thank you all for paying attention. A lot of these thoughts and concepts I've written a lot about, so please connect on Patreon. Thank you so much to all the amazing patrons, the new ones that have come in. I'm trying to hit 100 so I can keep producing zines, the Indigenous Action podcast, and posters every month. Trying to actually hit 200 because right now I'm working on a board game, an anti-colonial board game called Burn the Fort. Check out all my updates on Patreon. And I'm also writing a book about this whole issue, basically about sacred land defense, direct action, and Indigenous autonomy. So if you're interested, most of the book is already written in pieces that I've published here and there or published online. So I'm wanting to focus as much attention in finishing the board game and writing this book this year. And so Patreon is the place that helps me do it, because otherwise I just hustle other ways, graphic design and music and whatever I can. That's how I was raised. But blessings, thank you all so much for your support on Patreon and connecting, and more than anything, hopefully just sharing these experiences help, but also give some direction in relation to how we need to ensure that we are taking care in addressing the disconnect and disharmony we have with Mother Earth. And to restore that harmony means this is a fight. As I mentioned in my previous post, we come from a long legacy of ancestors who didn't just give up. This isn't the first virus that we faced. We fought back and we found different ways to survive. And that's why we're here today. It's not just that we're still here. It's that we're still here because of that resistance. And that's a powerful legacy and responsibility and duty that we have to uphold. So, thank you so much.